In our headlines on this Monday, February 24th, here in South Korea, Ukraine marks a grim milestone today. That is 3 years of Russian aggression, with Vladimir Putin attempting to justify the assault by asserting that it is necessary to protect Russian-speaking civilians in eastern Ukraine and to prevent Kyiv from entering NATO. Meanwhile, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick calls for an investment of at least $1 billion from Korean companies in the U.S. and for tangible results within Trump's term to qualify for business support. And the final hearing of the impeachment trial against President Yoon takes place tomorrow amid much anticipation in the details of his concluding remarks in defense of his short-lived martial law. The Trump administration is demanding payback from Ukraine for Washington's support of Kyiv's defense against Moscow's invasion. Our Park Go-nu starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump has sought a deal that would not only have Ukraine repay the U.S. for its financial support for the years, but more on top. The deal calls for the U.S. to take 50% of Ukraine's mineral and natural resources revenues, worth $500 billion. But the deal would include not only revenue from rare earth, but also uranium, lithium, oil, gas, and even some port revenues. The deal also specifies that U.S. companies must hold 50% ownership of Ukraine's rare earth elements deposits. This would allow the U.S. to receive more than 3 times what was given to Kyiv for its military and humanitarian support in the past 3 years. While Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky initially rejected the deal, calling for security guarantees, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff said on Sunday the agreement is expected to be signed sometime this week. However, one expert said the situation is more complex.
It's going to be very difficult because Zelensky doesn't have the constitutional right, even as the president in a time of martial law and war, to sign away his country's resources. This is something that will have to be scrutinized by the Ukrainian parliament and the various expert committees.
He added Ukraine has the power to slow down the process, while saying U.S. mining companies are less competitive than companies from countries like China and Australia. Meanwhile, President Zelensky has offered to resign from office in exchange for a peace guarantee and Ukraine's membership in NATO.
If it's about peace in Ukraine and you really want me to leave my position, I am ready to do that. I can exchange it for NATO membership if there is such an opportunity.
However, earlier this month, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said Kyiv joining NATO was unrealistic, shooting down any prospects of Ukraine's membership. Washington and Moscow will also be holding talks on improving bilateral relations in the coming days. The Kremlin said that the meeting will involve the Russian Foreign Ministry and the U.S. State Department. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
And against that backdrop, Ukraine today, that is February 24th, marks a grim milestone of unprovoked Russian assault that has lasted for 3 years. And the latest efforts to restore security and stability are doing little to offer a peace of mind. Our Kim Bo-kyung files this report.
11% of its land has been lost, and the population has decreased by nearly 10 million in Ukraine since Russia began its full-scale invasion in February 2022. Russia has captured most of the 4 southeastern regions: Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Considering land already lost to Russia, Crimea, and Russian-backed separatists since the conflict began in 2014, the total land Ukraine has lost is about 18%. Ukraine launched a surprise offensive last August, capturing Russia's Kursk region, only for it to be recaptured by Russian forces. Now, with Donald Trump back in the Oval Office, the war has entered a new phase, with the U.S. and Russia beginning the first step of a series of engagements to bring the war to an end. Excluded from the talks, Europe and Ukraine are scrambling for security measures to deter Russia. One expert says having Europe's own security force will be a must, though it might take some time.
Europe will have to have peacekeeping troops or some type of security forces, however they call it, but it will likely be difficult to form a large number of troops in a very short period of time.
Ukraine itself is working to have a U.S. presence in the territory, with Kyiv to reportedly soon sign a mineral agreement. The expert says the focal point would be what security measures the U.S. has promised Ukraine in return.
If Ukraine has made such significant concessions, accepting the mineral deal, it's likely that the U.S. made proposals of taking on a role in providing further security guarantees.
Even if the U.S. allows Ukraine to be a NATO member in exchange for mineral development rights for rare earth elements, whether Russia would tolerate this remains a question, though its original purpose was to just gain Ukraine's territory. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And North Korea is supplying half of Russia's ammunition on the front lines of the latter's military campaign against Ukraine. Now, this is according to the head of military intelligence in Ukraine's defense ministry, as reported by Reuters. Lieutenant General Kirilo Budanov says North Korea is supplying self-propelled howitzers and multiple rocket launch systems to Russia. Such remarks were shared during a press conference on the eve of the third year of Russian invasion of Ukraine. North Korea, in addition to providing weapons to Russia, deployed thousands of troops last year to support Russian forces. Also, North Korea, for the 15th year in a row, remains on the blacklist of an intergovernmental body founded in 1989 to fight money laundering and terrorist financing. Now, in its latest report last Friday, the Financial Action Task Force also raised concerns over North Korea's role in the funding of nuclear weapons proliferation. Accordingly, the task force is calling for increased vigilance and stronger measures to protect the global financial system. Also included on the blacklist are Iran and Myanmar. The Trump administration has called for an investment of at least $1 billion from Korean companies in return for business support. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin reports.
Newly appointed Commerce Secretary U.S. Howard Lutnick has told South Korea's business leaders that they should invest at least $1 billion in exchange for incentives from the U.S. government. The remark was made during a meeting with the South Korean business delegation led by SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won in Washington, D.C. on Friday local time. When a member of the delegation presented a multi-million-dollar investment plan, Lutnick said the U.S. seeks at least $1 billion in investment, an amount that would qualify for various forms of support from the U.S. government. This comment aligns with the America First investment policy memorandum that President Donald Trump signed after Lutnick's swearing-in ceremony. The memo states that foreign investments of at least $1 billion may qualify for expedited fast-track regulatory approvals, making it easier for investors from allied nations to complete deals quickly. Lutnick also stressed during the meeting that investments must deliver visible results within Trump's term, such as breaking ground on projects within a year of committing funds, hinting that mere investment pledges without timely actions would be unacceptable. Che, who met with reporters at the two-day Trans-Pacific dialogue that began on Friday, said that while the U.S. wants more production facilities to be built in the U.S., incentives must also be provided to Korean companies. He also added that the delegation achieved what it set out to do and that the U.S. was interested in the 6 sectors that were discussed, which include shipbuilding, energy, nuclear power, AI and semiconductors, and mobility, and materials, parts, and equipment. A White House official who was also present at the meeting echoed this sentiment, saying that while the U.S. has held over 20 economic delegations, the meeting with the South Korean delegation was the most productive. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
In other news, this past weekend, Japan ruffled diplomatic feathers by laying claim to South Korea's Dokdo Island yet again. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has details.
For 20 years, the local government in Japan's Shimane prefecture has been holding annual events to claim that Dokdo is Japanese territory. A senior Japanese official in charge of territorial issues, Eriko Imai, attended this year's ceremony on Saturday. The Japanese government has been sending vice ministerial level officials to the annual event since 2013, when Shinzo Abe served as the country's prime minister. Dokdo, located off South Korea's east coast, has long been at the center of diplomatic tension between the two neighboring countries. Japan has claimed sovereignty for decades in its policy papers, public statements, and school textbooks. In response, Seoul's foreign ministry called in Daisuke Mibae, the deputy chief of mission at the Japanese embassy in Seoul on Saturday, to protest. It also urged the Japanese government to immediately abolish the event, stressing that Dokdo is South Korean territory historically, geographically, and under international law. Experts say that it's important for Japan to act responsibly to forge a better bilateral relationship.
If Japan truly desires to achieve a meaningful relationship with South Korea, I believe the first step is to get rid of this absurd event. I would also like to say it's time for the Japanese government and local authorities to face up to its history and act in a way that will not be shameful to future generations.
This year marks the 60th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic relations between Seoul and Tokyo. But territorial claims over Dokdo continue to remain a major obstacle to improving bilateral ties. Arirang News.
And come tomorrow, that is Tuesday, the final hearing at the impeachment trial against President Yoon takes place in the afternoon. Amid much anticipation in the details of the president's upcoming concluding remarks in defense of his short-lived martial law, our correspondent Oh Soo-young has more.
President Yoon will have one last chance to make his case against impeachment this week, as the Constitutional Court wraps up trial hearings on Tuesday. The 11th and final session comes 73 days after the National Assembly passed a vote to remove him from power after his December 3rd martial law order. According to the court, the justices will review the remaining evidence that hasn't been scrutinised yet before giving both the National Assembly and President Yoon's legal teams 2 hours to present their closing arguments. Then the Assembly's impeachment panel chair Chung Chong-le and President Yoon will deliver their final statements with no time restrictions. Chung is expected to wrap up the Assembly's position that Yoon's declaration of martial law was illegal in both procedure and substance, and that his orders on December 3rd violate constitutional principles. Meanwhile, Yoon is expected to reiterate arguments previously presented by his legal team that martial law is an executive right of the president and was issued as a warning against the dominant opposition party's tyranny in parliament that paralysed government functions. Yoon has also raised concerns over national security and election fraud. As speculation grows over whether Yoon will present a political compromise or gesture, including a suggestion to revise the amendment to shorten his presidential term, his legal team said Sunday that it is not the president's style to offer conditional measures in order to avoid impeachment. The team said Yoon is currently preparing his final statement and is carefully considering various options. Once the hearings conclude, the deliberation period begins. Then Presiding Justice Chung Yong-sik will present his review before all 8 justices vote for or against impeachment. The ruling will be drafted based on the majority opinion. The court will then decide the date to announce the verdict, which is expected within 2 weeks of the last hearing, likely in around mid-March. If 6 or more of the 8 justices vote in favour of the impeachment, President Yoon will be removed from office, triggering a snap presidential election within 60 days. However, if at least 3 justices oppose impeachment, the motion will be dismissed and President Yoon will immediately resume his duties. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Over in Germany, Friedrich Merz is poised to become the next chancellor as his centre-right Christian Democratic Union party wins the highest proportion of the ballots cast in Sunday's election. Our Yoon has the latest.
Germany's conservative Christian Democratic Union is expected to win the federal election, positioning its leader, Friedrich Merz, to become the next chancellor of Europe's largest economy.
We must now quickly regain our ability to act so that we can do the right thing at home, so that we can be present in Europe again, so that the world realizes that Germany is being governed reliably again. That's what the conservatives stand for. That's what we stand for, and that's what I personally stand for.
On Sunday, initial exit polls showed that Merz's CDU and the allied Christian Social Union secured just under 30% of the votes, leaving the center-left Social Democratic Party of current Chancellor Olaf Scholz far behind with approximately 16%. In second place was the far-right Alternative for Germany, securing around 20%, roughly doubling its result from the 2021 election. The AfD's surge, fueled by growing public concerns over immigration and security, was accompanied by a vow from the party leader to claim first place in future elections. However, despite the party's strong showing, the AfD will not be part of the new government, as all other parties have committed to excluding them from power. With Merz's victory nearly certain, he now faces the task of forming a coalition government, which he has vowed to complete by Easter, April 20th. To secure a majority in parliament, Merz will likely need to form alliances with one or more parties, potentially including the SPD, which experienced a dramatic drop from its 2021 result of over 25%, marking its worst performance. Despite the open support for the far-right Alternative for Germany party from figures like Elon Musk and US Vice President J.D. Vance during the election, President Donald Trump welcomed Merz's victory, calling it a great day for both Germany and the US. Merz, who has never held a ministerial position, has promised to take a strong leadership role in Europe and increase support for Ukraine. In a roundtable TV discussion on Sunday night, Merz remarked that it had become clear in recent days that the Trump administration was largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. He emphasized that his priority would be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible to achieve real independence from the US, step by step. Yoon, Arirang News.
And in sports news, Tottenham Hotspur captain Heung-min has become the 11th English Premier League player with at least 70 goals and 70 assists. The Spurs played Ipswich Town away on Sunday, and Son contributed with 2 assists in the 4-1 win. Now, this latest performance gives him an EPL total of 126 goals and 71 assists, just behind current Premier League stars Mohamed Salah and Kevin De Bruyne. It's also the 5th season that Son has scored and assisted at least 10 goals. Up next, we share with you some promising advances in the use of surgical robots in interventional treatment of cardiovascular disease. Our Cha Yun-kyung explains.
Researchers have been using a surgical robot, nicknamed the catheter robot, to perform venous and arterial catheterization for the removal of blood clots. A guide wire is moved through blood vessels controlled by the robot and overseen by a certified surgeon who can take control using a joystick to locate and treat blockages in, for example, the carotid arteries. The success rate of treatment using the catheter robot has been 100% in clinical trials due to its precise control and accuracy, and it also reduces operation times by assisting the surgeon effectively. It also lowers a patient's exposure to radiation by cutting the time needed for real-time X-ray imaging. The robot is currently undergoing further clinical trials before commercialization after acquiring the new excellent technology certification from the Ministry of Health and Welfare for the first time in Korea's surgical robot industry.
We will start using catheter robots in 5 designated hospitals from July this year. We can lower the operation time by controlling the robot precisely, 1 millimeter at a time.
Surgical robots are being welcomed by patients as they raise the accuracy of surgery and lower the error range. Eyes are on whether catheter robots can be successfully commercialized. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In the Middle East, Israel has postponed the release of over 600 Palestinian prisoners, citing concerns over the humiliating nature of recent hostage return ceremonies conducted by Hamas. On Sunday local time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the indefinite delay of the release of 620 Palestinian prisoners. This is in response to what Israel describes as cynical and demeaning ceremonies orchestrated by Hamas during the handover of Israeli hostages. During the recent release of 6 Israeli captives, Hamas paraded the individuals before crowds in highly publicized events, a move Israel claims breaches the terms of the ceasefire agreement. Netanyahu has demanded assurances from Hamas to cease such practices before any further prisoner releases occur. In response, Hamas has accused Israel of not fulfilling its obligations under the ceasefire deal. The postponement raises concerns about the fragility of the ceasefire agreement. In Rome, Pope Francis remains in critical condition at the Gemelli Hospital. due to a severe respiratory infection and early signs of kidney failure, according to the Vatican. Despite his health challenges, the Pope, aged 88, remains alert and has expressed gratitude for the global prayers supporting him. Also in a pre-recorded message, he marked the 3rd anniversary of the Ukraine conflict, describing it as a painful and shameful milestone for humanity. Meanwhile, dozens of people gathered beneath Pope Francis' hospital window, as well as at the Vatican, to pray for his recovery. Finally, in the United Kingdom, Peggy, a 5-year-old pug and Chinese crested mix, has won the Best Canine Newcomer Award at the FITUS Awards, an Academy Award for dogs in London. Peggy had been crowned Britain's ugliest dog in 2023 for her unique appearance, characterized by her sparse white hair and tongue sticking out. Those looks caught the attention of filmmakers, leading her to the role of Dogpool in the blockbuster Deadpool and Wolverine. On set, Peggy charmed co-stars Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman, mastering tricks like jumping into Reynolds' arms. Her journey from rescue dog to successful silver screen star has inspired many to consider adopting rescue dogs. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
It's the last Monday of February. The morning started at around -6 degrees Celsius in Seoul, but the cold spell has weakened a bit during the day, with Seoul rising up to 5 degrees, about 5 degrees higher than the same time yesterday. The temperature will move up to 7 degrees tomorrow, rising up to the normal level for this time of year. The dryness of the atmosphere is intensifying as cold and dry winds blow. Currently, dry weather warnings and advisories are issued all over the country. As strong winds of around 50 meters per second will blow, please be careful with wildfires. Tomorrow, Daejeon and Daegu will start off at -4 degrees, Chuncheon at -7 degrees. Daytime temperatures will rise up to around 10 degrees in most parts of the country. Daejeon and Gwangju will move up to 9 degrees. It will hit 10 degrees in Busan and Jeju. The days will get warmer and warmer as we head into the second half of the week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, and today we touch upon diplomacy. Do stay with us.